The Time Out for Mental Health podcast is where we speak to sports figures about their experience with mental health issues related to depression, masculinity, and suicide. These sensitive topics are often swept under the rug as detailed in my new book, You Don't Have to Swallow Your Gun, a simple book for men about depression, masculinity, and suicide. Men in particular need support to ask for help when they feel off and don't know what's really going on with them. If they do not seek help, their behavior can turn dangerous, including alcoholism, drug and pill addiction, anger, fighting violence, and in some cases, death by suicide. On the podcast, we want to uncover these issues so men can live a happy and healthy life, even if they do suffer from mental health issues. Our guest today is Mark Pattinson, one of the most successful people in the world today, and we're honored that Mark is sharing some of his time with us. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, considering everything, going through this COVID-19, situation around the world.
It is a tough challenge. It's like every day we have to be ready to saddle up and go forward. Let me first frame our discussion, and then we can drill down into some specifics. Mark, you're an outstanding athlete, and you have been for most of your life. Started off in high school football. You were a superstar during high school and on to UW. And you were coached by one of the best there, Don James. And before going on to a career in the NFL with the LA Raiders, the New Orleans Saints, and the Seattle Seahawks. You've also taken up mountain climbing at a very high level. No pun intended. Did you ever think you would be a mountain climber that hiked up the 7 tallest mountains in the world?
I never did, but I think there's a lot wrapped into one. So kind of that very generous description that you gave me, you're really encapsulating 30, 35 years, kind of the body of work, 40 years even. And in high school, and I want to lead up to this because it ties back, I think, to your book. I think the title is "Swallowing the Gun" or something, and it's a really telling title. And there have been times when I wouldn't say I've been in that point, but what my worth in life and so to kind of reset some of that, in high school, I could run around, pretty much do whatever I wanted to do. Football came very easy for me, but I loved it. I was that gym rat that was out there all the time, and I was very fortunate to get some attention from around the country. I did choose the University of Washington. I was able to play with a coach that would later become a Hall of Fame coach, Don James. The one thing that I didn't really understand, though, was the kind of work ethic that it takes to do anything great. And what I essentially did is just show up. So I remember that first day I got out there in training camp and in August, and I was 6'2", 181 pounds. I could not bench my weight. And I was looking at all these very intense players. They were 21, 22 years old, gunned up, confident. And I just said to myself, I am not there. I'm not one of those guys. And so it was a really rough period of time for probably the first year. And I even came to the kind of a come to Jesus moment where I asked myself, I either need to choose door number 1 or door number 2. And door number 1's the easy path to quit, or door number 2 is I can buckle up and I can get in the weight room and I can start really deploying what Coach James was trying to teach us about the pyramid of success, the 25 different building blocks that any of us and anything that we do can lead to a championship, to lead to the pinnacle of whatever that chosen field is that you want to do. But I had to do the work. And the magical thing about that was that there was no certainty on the other end of it. So in other words, just because I went in the weight room and just because I ran the stadium stairs every night in the rain and I worked on film study and everything else didn't mean I was one day going to play. But what I did is I put myself in the best position to do all those things. So now you fast forward the clock and some good things happen. I finally got my opportunity and I put myself in a great position. And when my moment came up, I pulled through. I caught a last-second touchdown in my first game against Michigan. We won the game in Sports Illustrated. all kinds of stuff. And it was really amazing. And so, fast forward in the clock from there, then I get drafted. I go down to LA with the Raiders. It was amazing. My career, was all over the board. I got cut. I was brought back. I was traded. I was all these things. But somehow or another, I squeezed out 5 years. And so then when I came to the end, there was kind of two defining points, actually three. The first one was making the decision my first year in college that what I was going to do with my life. Was I going to quit, or was I going to put in the work and go forward? Number two was when I got done playing in the NFL, that literally going off the cliff for so many athletes, because now I'm 29 years old. I've been playing football since I was, in fourth grade, and you're doing this one thing that you absolutely love. And in the NFL, I would have done it for free, but I happened to get paid, which was nice. And now I have no direction. Now, the NFL has done a hell of a job to create something called the trust and really invest in a team of people back in New York trying to give a roadmap to what to do life after football. So it's a whole different animal today. But again, there was a 2-year gap where I was trying to say, who am I? And we can get back into that here in a little bit. And then kind of the last big point, which led into the mountains, your original questions, did I ever see myself climbing mountains? The reason why I started climbing mountains is because of this awful time I was going through about 10 years ago, where the gal that I was married to, I'd been with her for 24 years, and married to her for 24 years, and with her for 30, no longer don't want to be married to me. And so with having kids and everything else, I just felt no value, and I was lost, and I was alone. And that's really that moment of truth where I had to what do I want my life to look like? So that's what ultimately got me in the mountains.
Okay, good. Very good answer. Let me go back a little and ask you about when you were in high school playing football. Did you ever have that career vision of being an NFL player, or did that not occur to you, or was that something you focused on?
I think there's the whole part of visualization, and I could never see myself. I thought those guys were something like Superman. Like I could never see myself in that position.
Right.
But I remember growing up and in the backyard and playing every day with my childhood friend, Dean Baker, that we would throw the ball back and forth. It would be pouring down rain. We'd be out there in T-shirts growing up in Seattle. And we'd always emulate like we were, it sounds weird to say now, but O.J. Simpson or, the players back in those days from USC and Washington and other, like I could see myself like that was my pinnacle of playing college football. But I didn't really understand the path to get there. I just was kind of going about doing my thing. And I just happened to be better than most of the kids that were out in the field.
Right. Okay, so now you're in the NFL, and you told us that you had some work to do around weight training and physicality to be at their level. Besides that, tell us a little bit about that experience and maybe some things that you liked or you didn't like during that time in the league.
Yeah, well, actually, it's my physicality had come. So that was really referring back to when I was in college, going through there. And I just wasn't physically capable to take on those guys. And by the time I left the University of Washington, I could bench a lot of weight. And I had learned and I had played against a lot of the top players, against USC, UCLA, Stanford, these other teams that had other NFL-type talent. And so I understood what it took at that point to go. And so, there's I think when you're playing sports, there's a physical element, there's a mental element, and there's an emotional element. And really those three things all really need to come together, because you may have all the physical tools in the world. When there was a lot of guys that were more physically gifted than me, more so in the NFL, but they were off doing drugs, right? And they weren't doing the things they had to take care of, or they were going through, there was an emotional level, spirituality about them that they weren't just, so it gave me an edge of being there every day and just doing the right things that I had to do.
So tell me can you talk a little bit about the mental aspect of playing in the NFL and what that was like for you?
Yeah. I mean, It's a really good question because you have to have a complete no fear attitude when you walk out on the field. And I'm going to throw this word around, I think the public, when I've seen the reactions, like, "Oh my God, there was a fight." There were fights every day, and when I'm fighting for another guy's position and job, it's just the way it is. It's just part of the culture, and it's very violent. And if it's very easy to get intimidated, and if you don't walk out, and there's nothing like there's a single focus, and it's the only focus in the world. It's like if I were going to go out and ride the Tour de France, I mean, nothing matters. Girlfriends, wives, kids, all of this, nothing mattered except for this one goal. And there's nothing that was going to stop me from achieving that goal. And I looked around the room. I remember when we all got in there, Raiders, and Tom Flores gets up in front. I'm looking around the room. There's Howie Long, and Marcus Allen, Lyle Zato, Cliff Branch, Jim Plunkett. I mean, the room was loaded with talent. And then we have all these free agents and all these rookies, and they go, "Hey guys, I just want, that, we have a core team here, and we drafted all these people, and just understand that at the end of the day, there's only going to be 55 of you as there's like 100 of us sitting in this room." And I looked around that room and I said, "I don't know who you're talking about, but it's not me, because I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to make this team." And you have to go in, and you have to have that mentality, or is it not going to happen?
So was there ever a time where mentally and emotionally you were up against the wall and you were down in the dumps and you just felt terrible and you weren't sure, you had a lot of doubt?
My last year with the Seahawks, I was brought to, it was the first year of free agency, and I had a great thing going down in New Orleans. And hindsight's 2020, as they say. And Tom Flores, the old Raider head coach, had become the president and general manager of the Seattle Seahawks. And so he did everything he could to bring me up there, threw a bunch of money at me, and I took the bait and I went up there, and it was just the wrong fit. And I went through this group, and there was a lot of alliances that I didn't fit in with that had been there before, which meant I would have taken their jobs. And it was just a bad fit. And I lost my spirit. And I knew that once I lost my spirit, because again, you have to have that constant, competitiveness and drive and focus. And I knew that I lost that. And I knew I was done. I couldn't go. I mean, I was done. I was 29 years old. And I decided to hang it up. I had still physical skills to go play, but I'd lost the mental edge that was going to enable me to take on all those different players and come back again. I knew I was done, and I hung it up.
During that time, had it ever gone through your mind that you were depressed or depression was happening with you?
I don't know if it was depression. I think, though, I mean, that I'm not clinically schooled and exactly what the definition is of that, but I knew that in terms of my career, that I kind of jumped off one cliff and onto another, and I didn't have a game plan of where that was going to take me. And that was so frustrating and so hard, because I'd always been successful. And when you go from being in the limelight and having that kind of attention and making, six figures and going from six figures to zero, it's a hard, in the NFL, you're not building a career necessarily. You're playing a career, and then that thing that you love so much just ends. So it's coming to the reality of what were you going to do next. And, I was walking around, all my friends who had come out of college had been kind of working their way up the ladder of figuring out what they were going to do. And they were kind of in their thing. And I had to start back at the bottom. And that was very difficult.
So when you're in that locker room, do you see other players? Do you notice that other players are going through a negative time and feeling down and maybe a little bit depressed for a few months?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing it's an interesting question, because I think it comes full circle back into it's counterintuitive, isn't, at least from my perspective as a professional athlete, because you have to be this gladiator. and you've got to be this macho dude. And when I was going through, from a little bit in high school, a lot of it in college, and then all of it in the NFL, you're walking around with a bunch of badasses, and you're all lifting weights, and you're all running, and you're all fighting your tail off, and it's about kill 'em and aggressiveness and all this other stuff. And then to turn around and then be really vulnerable about your feelings to people, it's just counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people, especially back in my day. Now, things I'm sure have changed with the kind of help that the NFL is giving players now. There were no hotlines. There were nobody to really talk to. So everybody was always kind of walking around like, yeah, I'm a badass, and nobody was crying on the field, or nobody, it wasn't like that back then.
So then there was nobody on the Raiders staff or Seahawks or Saints, nobody that you could go to and talk about your situation. Is that correct?
There was no tools in the tool shed.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at your nuclear family. While you were growing up as a kid, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Seattle, Washington. My mom and dad were married until my dad passed away about 5 years ago. My mom, we call her Mary Poppins, and she's alive and well. She's 85 years old, and I have a sister as well.
That's great. And how would you characterize your father as a man? Was he tough on you? Did he ever get in your face? Did he show you love? Anything around emotions or feelings? What was that like?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because what I try to do, I have two daughters now, one 21 and one 23, and I really tried to break the pattern. My dad was a wonderful man, but he grew up in an interesting time. His dad was an alcoholic. His dad had passed away when he was 16 years old, and so he had to kind of become the man of the family. He grew up in a small fishing village in a small coastal port outside of Seattle, a couple hours away from Seattle. And so we never hugged. He never told me he loved me. Every time I'd come, he was the happiest guy ever to see me. He supported me in every single way you could possibly imagine, but it was always with a handshake, and that's what I got. And so for me, breaking the pattern was to make sure that I tell my girls I love them all the time, and I give them hugs. So I had to break that cycle of life, and that's just that's what he knew. And it was unfortunate, because at the end of the day, I think it in part led to his stroke, to his death. And it's just, he hadn't dealt with things.
Did you ever experience any abuse? Was he yelling at you or hitting you or anything like that?
No, not at all. Not at all. He, like I said, he was the best dad ever. Now, I'll tell you this, that was kind of odd is, this is going back to high school, and as you can imagine, the little league, I'd go score 3 or 4 touchdowns in a game, and, he would never acknowledge that. It was always like, hey, you blocked really well in that game. And it was just a weird thing, and I remember one thing that really hurt me is when I first got to Roosevelt High School, and that was obviously my high school, and it's the big city school in Seattle. And when I was a freshman, when you walked into the men's locker room, which ultimately became where the football guys would put their football stuff and everything, and there was a little meeting room, and on that meeting room, there were most inspirational, and then there's these names. And I looked up on the names, and there was a bunch of guys who had gone on to the University of Washington, and in my eyes, they were famous guys. And I said, there was a secret to myself, but I said, someday my name is going to be on that wall. And my senior, both my junior year as a wide receiver, as an All-American, I was All-State, I was Player of the Year, and then I switched to quarterback, and the exact same thing happened that next year. And at the banquet, when they came to give out, they gave me this award called Messiah's Locker, and they gave the most inspirational award to some other kid. I just couldn't figure it out. And about 10 years after the fact, my mother disclosed that my dad had gone to the head coach, and they had told him not to give me that award because I was getting accolades from everybody else, and somebody else was more deserving. And that probably crushed me more than anything.
Oh, I
Just
can
for not,
imagine.
right? Because that was my personal goal. And then my dad was trying to do the right thing, but the wrong result came out of it.
Yeah, sure. Well, you said you have two children now, and so you're a parent. How do you characterize yourself as a parent?
Well, I mean, look, I've tried to be as involved as ever. You know, I coach the kids. You know, growing up, I try to do the best I can. I'm super involved. I I support them in every way. Like I said, I've tried to break the patterns of um, of connection um, by the physical part of hugging them and making sure they feel loved. And then every night before I go to bed, I send both of them a text and say, I love you. Have a great night. When in the morning, you know, I wake up, quick text. It takes me 2 seconds. Boom, just acknowledge, because we're not obviously all in the house, you know, anymore. And the one thing, you know, it's been sad for me, but we used to all go on road trips together as a family. And then when my wife decided to check out on me, you know, it just breaks up a family and it sucks. And that's the thing that's been the hardest point of kind of, you know, like this new life going forward as a divorced single dad, you know, how that works. Now, my girls come out to Sun Valley, Idaho, where I live now, and they visit me and we do all kinds of fun stuff, and that's cool. But it's just, you know, the dynamic has changed a little bit.
So, can I drill down a little bit on that time post NFL? You come back home, and here's your family, and I've heard you on your podcast, uh, the Finding Your Summit podcast. You talk about your dark time. So, can you kind of tell me a little bit about that and what happened and how you handled that?
Well, again, there's two dark. Well, I've said three, but you know, my second dark time again is this transition out of the NFL and into business. And you know, it was just I was in Los Angeles, and then I got married, which probably wasn't a good decision at that time because I didn't have a career. I'd saved all my money, so I was financially set there, but I wasn't emotionally, you know, in a good spot. And I think I just brought a lot of frustration to the marriage early on. And that was just again just a function of being like a guy with a very focused goal to now being with no direction, right? And so it took me probably 2 years to dig my way out of it, and I spent a lot of time like spinning my wheels and trying to think. The one thing I learned out of it years later was that action creates reaction. And sitting around all day and thinking about different things and not doing anything about it doesn't get you anywhere. And at least if you go forward and do something, which I'd later figure out, you at least know if that was something you wanted to do or not to do, right? But you could never make that evaluation if you didn't like jump into the fear and go figure it out. I ultimately started a marketing company, and that kind of led me. It was a good path for me for a number of years. And that kind of supported the family, and I got my direction, I got my focus, my energy behind that. And it was tough couple of years.
So during that time, again, did you feel any depression? Were you into any risky behavior, anger, violence, substance abuse, anything like that?
Yeah, you know, everybody's got their own outlet, and for me, I'm 58 years old now, and for me, it's my drug of choice has been my athletics
Mm-hmm.
and going out and run. And I've solved a lot of problems when I've gone on these long runs or these long climbs or hikes or mountain bike rides or something, where I'm just in there and I'm processing through. And it doesn't work for everybody, but that has really served me well over time to really get the stress out and just to think about things, and other things have come to me about ideas to go forward in something, or maybe I'm frustrated. But you know, I've never been a big drinker. I've never really done drugs. And I just choose to approach life with a lot of positivity. And that is helped. I probably got that from my mother, but that's helped me kind of weather some of these darker times, you know, when it looks like I've got nowhere to turn.
During that time, did you speak to any of your male friends about it, or seek any professional help to just help you with your thought process?
I don't think I was emotionally available in the right way coming out of the NFL. I'd been used to being, again, this gladiator. And then all of a sudden, I've since learned, I didn't figure this out till I was 50, but I just thought that if I let my guard down, then people would look at me as a weak individual. And I couldn't have been more wrong in the way I approached that. And really, again, it didn't happen until I was 50, but, the more I started expressing myself, the more power I felt from not only getting it out of my chest, but just saying, hey, I'm not perfect. These are what's going on. And actually figuring out that half the time, the more things I tell somebody, the more things they're telling me, about what's going on with their life and their willingness to open up. And that's been kind of the light gone off for me.
Cool. So you just said there that you were knowledgeable and were practicing what I call archaic masculinity norms, that you didn't want to reveal any weakness. You didn't want anybody to feel like you were less than or not a man or something like that.
I'm guilty as charged. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think we all go through that until we get to some point of self-discovery. I know for me, it was sobriety, and that's when I started opening myself up to take a look at what was really going on, because I was too busy working, making money, having fun. And I just wasn't aware that I was practicing this masculinity that the media had taught me growing up for years, that it was all about being a man, toughen up, don't be a pansy, etc. And it's tough to be vulnerable for a lot of men, but that is one of the keys to developing healthy relationships and being able to learn about life and learn about our next step that we really need to take.
I think one of the best things that ever happened to me, even though it sucked at the time, was getting divorced. Not that divorce is the answer, but I think that's what I had to do to go through all that pain to really start to open up about, who I was and what I was going through. To my friends, first time I'd really done that, they were shocked when I was telling them all this different stuff. And so as a result of that, all these amazing things have come from that. And so there's this kind of this chain reaction because I had to face the fear or face my situation, and the family was going to break up. And that was a big emotional swing for me. And how is that going to go forward? And what was that going to look like? And I was going through all those questions. Ultimately, the mountain climbing, which putting a gigantic goal out there to try to become the first NFL player to ever climb the 7 summits, changed my focus, my energy about where I was thinking about myself and poor me and everything else, and started okay, now to go to Kilimanjaro, what do you got to do and how are you going to get there? And all this path I've been on, and that ultimately led to starting a podcast. I'm on, I think, episode 162 now. And I've talked to all these amazing people that have these incredible things that have happened to them. Like, you got to be kidding. And the more I've talked to them, it's really helped me just digest, maybe my situation wasn't as bad and dire as what I originally thought. So that word perspective comes into it. And then, getting to be on podcasts like this with you to learn your story and to engage with people that I would have never thought in a million years that I would even be talking to I'm saying this in kind of a weird way, if my now ex-wife hadn't given me the gift of kicking me out to go and do these other things. And so my career and public speaking, these things that I would have never thought possible, I don't think it have ever happened unless I'd gone through that transformation.
Yeah, we all learn from our mistakes. I have a saying that mistakes are the seeds of greatness. And how do we know what to do unless we try? And sometimes we're going to succeed, sometimes not. And then we figure out, okay, that didn't work, so I'm going to take another path. So
that's actually brilliant what you just said, and I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna steal it. But mistakes are the seeds to success,
yeah,
and I believe that, and I love what you said because you're right, and that self discovery. And we were saying this kind of at the very beginning, but if you're not growing, you're dying. And so it's made me look at like everything forward going into my life. And just like even with the seventh summit, I'm now on my final quest. I was supposed to be on Everest today, the top of Everest today, as we're doing this podcast on May 21st, going for the top, but the whole world was shut down. Right. And so that didn't happen, but next year I'll go back and hopefully, knock on wood, I'll be able to accomplish that. But people have said, Mark, at the end of that, what are you going to do? Like, is it all over? I'm like, no, man, the game's just beginning. It's beginning because of those seeds that you were just talking about teach me about this new path, and there's a better way to actually live.
Yeah. Something else that I go by is it doesn't matter what happens. It's how we take it, what we learn from it. Because the key, like you mentioned earlier, is taking action. And, my dad used to say, look, there's only two ways to go, the right way or the wrong way. And he was right. And if you take a step in the wrong direction, okay, then you got to, re-strategize and figure out how you're going to get to this other direction and get to the summit like you were talking about.
But I think that for me, this is just one person's opinion, but the magic key that unlocked all that was my ability to finally figure out that the more that I could share and the more vulnerable I could be towards anybody who was willing to talk to me was really what set me free. And until I could take that gladiator armor and put it down, I wasn't going to be half the person that, I want to be, and I think I can become.
What I've learned in doing my research for this book and others is that it actually takes more courage to ask for help than hide underneath the covers and sweep everything under the rug.
For sure.
Because you develop, a little more context as a man, and realize that it's not just about strength and power. And, having a difficult discussion with a family member or your daughters, and knowing that it's going to be hard, but it's essential, that's an important part of being a man as well. Being able to do the things that are tough, but you take it on anyway, and you don't, hide in the closet about it. You deal with it, and everybody walks away as better people. So, how would you define healthy masculinity now that you've gone through all of these experiences that you've had?
Well, look, I think that at the end of the day, my life is way richer today than it's ever been, probably in the last, 5 to 8 years than it's ever been, in my past. If you take 8 years, my past 50 years, right? And I think that has just come to grips with being real and sharing my true feelings, being as authentic as I possibly can. Keeping that positivity, keeping big goals that are out there. And again, I think in one sense for me, everybody's got a different way of dealing with things, but I am totally 100% tenacious about my workouts. I have to be, you're going to go climb Mount Everest. I do CrossFit in the morning. I go climb a mountain every night. Right. And that's just what I have to do to get there. And again, that helps me relieve a lot of stress. But the other component we just talked about was being consistent with my podcast, because most of those 162 questions or podcasts that I've done are dealing with people that have no arms, no legs, or blind, were burned in a car crash. I mean, just horrific type things. And it's it's really helped me understand the word compassion about my, fellow mankind. And I think it's just made me a better person overall, because I'm constantly having these conversations versus saying, hey, I'm good, and then, going off. And I know you're kind of in the early stages of podcasting, but podcasting, it's hard because of scheduling and people canceling and finding new guests and all that kind of stuff. But I've stayed disciplined to it and committed to it. And that, like anything you do, it's been more about the mental health. Really, it's been more my reward than probably their reward for being on the podcast, is because of what I've been able to learn.
So regarding the podcast, how do you characterize it? What's your context surrounding your podcast and how you take it on?
Well, it's interesting because when in the kind of the early days, I was trying to figure out, somebody interviewed me like this, and as I was doing the interview with Yogi Roth, he's a Pac-12 announcer on the Pac-12 network, and as he was talking to me, I was having this little person inside my head saying, you know what, I think I can do this. I know a lot of people, and so ultimately I did. And as I was figuring out what the name was, and what I'd just gone through, and because I'd put this big goal out there, it just kind of seemed finding your summit seemed like a good. So the tagline is finding your summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And it's really my personal journey, but it's really become much more metaphorical over time, because it's not just one summit. It's everybody's going after multiple summits. You've got your own thing that you're doing, writing books and overcoming your, whatever your personal demons are. We all have them, which I've learned. And that's been my journey. And so it's been fascinating to phrase it up that way and then learn about all these other stories that are out there that need to be told.
So you also do some public speaking. So
Yeah.
Do you approach that in the same realm as you do your podcast?
Yeah, I think it's really important that, when I step out there, I know that if you just look at the bullet points and it says former NFL player, and it says Sports Illustrated, and it says 7 Summit, guy that's going after all that. And I think it's really important that I have the same problems as everybody else. I'm not special at all. I'm not unique. And so it's me trying to bridge that connection between I'm just like you, and that helps to tell my story about I've got 2 kids, I've had a dog, I've been divorced, and half the room, has had the same situation of them. That's not unique, right? It's how you deal with these things, and then really having a set of strategies to go forward to emerge yourself up. And all I can tell you is what's worked for me. And what's worked for me is just, this something I learned from my head coach, Don James, the pyramid of success. I've kind of broken that down and created my own summits acronym model. And it's just like, you want to get out of it. This is what helped me emerge from my tough times and has gotten me to these different places. But there was definitely a roadmap, and I was lost, and I was confused, and I was all those things that everybody else at some point in time in their life goes through. But it is a roadmap, and it has worked successfully time over time for a lot of people. And so here's how it's worked. And I throw out some examples from my mountain climbing, from Sports Illustrated, and from my NFL football days.
Do you feel inside, do you feel a responsibility to help your fellow man?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting when you say that, and my daughter has epilepsy.
Oh.
And this has been a long journey. And so, in the past, I've helped to raise money for this group called Water Boys. And what we were doing is raising a bunch of money. And Chris Long, son of Howie, who played for the Eagles and the Patriots, started this organization. It was all about building water wells in Tanzania to help the people of the Maasai tribe, because they didn't have any water, and all these bad things happen to them when they're trying to go out and get water, or these streams and everything else. And so a year ago, my daughter was mission critical. She was at the University of Arizona, And so I said, why am I doing this? It's a great organization, but I need to be helping my daughter in a much bigger way. And so I rolled up my sleeves and I called the National Epilepsy Foundation. I partnered with them, and we created a foundation called Amelia's Everest. And so essentially it's just, trying to raise, we raised it, $29,029. We raised almost $30,000 in an event that we had January 2nd or 3rd. And now I'm partnering with another organization called Higher Ground, and we're going to raise a bunch more money. But at the end of the day, it's been great because my daughter, her seizures are down, way down. We started a new drug because we had this event which created awareness. She just got a 3.5. After last year, this exact same time, we had to do a medical withdrawal for her. So that's where my focus is helping my kids. And if I can be of inspiration and help anybody else along the way, then, hey, I'm there for you. I want to do that. But they start immediately with trying to help my own daughter.
That's great. Well, get you out on this. You've had an amazing life so far, Mark. How do you top what you've achieved in the last 58 years?
I just don't see it that way. And again, that's really when you talked about, when I go out and public speak, I don't want people to walk away with that. I want to I still see myself as I'm still in the first inning. And I look at, I've done a couple cool things. We've talked about those, but think of all the things that I have not done. Climb the highest peaks in every state. I happen to have done 4 and 4 of the hardest ones, but what a great road trip to go to Colorado and Utah and Montana and go on the East Coast, right down through the South, get in a Sprinter van or something and go climb the highest mountain. I mean, it can go on and on and on. There was some show that came on the other night that is some northern island above Greenland or something that I've never heard of. Like, how cool would that be to go there and look for walruses or something, so there's just 1,000,001 different things that I think as we go, and I keep immersing myself in these different activities, things come back at me, and that's the whole key is keep pushing. I don't think that I'm 58 now and in a couple of years at 65, I retire. I'm just not on that train. I'll keep pushing and driving and trying to raise money and helping people till, I fall over.
I'm with you. As you can see, Mark's story is quite awesome. Mark's a man of courage, bravery, and honor, true role model for our world today. We are honored to have you on our podcast today. Do you have any final thoughts, Mark?
Yes, the final thought is it takes a little more to make a champion. I say this every day to my kids. I live it myself, and I think it's very easy to be average, and it's really hard to be great, and that's how you get there. Make the extra effort.
Great. I look forward to continuing our dialogue, Mark, moving forward so I can learn from you so I can help others. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.
Listeners, please look out for the Time Out for Mental Health podcast where you get your podcasts, and keep your eyes out for my new book, You Don't Have to Swallow Your Gun, a simple book for men about depression, masculinity, and suicide.